Hello everyone, it's Elena Nikitina, the author of the award-winning book Girl Taken. Today I'm going to read the second chapter of the book. Thank you guys for listening to my story, it means a world to me. I would really appreciate if you can write a comment, like this video, and subscribe to my channel. Let's get started. Chapter 2, October 1994, Grozny, Chechnya. I woke up for a little bit into blurriness and then fell into a dream again. I was immersed in some other world, a world without pain or thoughts, without feelings or experiences. I drifted. I felt like an abandoned ship without a helmsman, floating with the tides and blown about by the wind. They kept me in a small room now. I was drifting in darkness. The waves of oblivion covered me for long periods of time, an infinity of time, and then they were replaced by a fleeting surge of conscious existence. But only for a moment. I floated in a black eternity. I passed out of time and space, and I was forgotten. I even forgot myself. Then I came back again. This endless and emotionless chain repeated in a circle, I don't know for how long. Maybe it happened that way, or maybe it was just my sore brain playing evil tricks on me. My mind refused to work in the usual mode. What was the reason for this? Was I in shock, or was I still being drugged? I had no idea. In those moments, I did not understand that I should enjoy this vegetable existence and these blunted feelings. Later in my captivity, I became so desperate I would have given almost anything to escape into the black world of dreams, at least for a few moments, and forget where I was. Such lost lucidity was a gift rather than a punishment. Being numb meant there was no chance for tears and terror and impotent fury at my helpless state. Brief glimpses of consciousness, alternating with bottomless sleep, left no room for painful emotions. After a couple of hours, or couple of weeks, or perhaps it was years, or decades, or centuries, time had lost all meaning. New people came for me. Even through my dreams, I realized that they wanted to take me with them. They were alien to me. Men with blurred faces, framed by dark hair and beards. I did not understand what they were saying, and I did not care. I was beyond caring. I felt myself floating in the air like a balloon, so light and indifferent. I was broken. I was no longer me, not a full person, a mere shadow of the Lena I had been very recently. I could no longer feel my senses, and could not be left on my own. I did not belong to myself. I could not make decisions. My life was decided by strange and scary people. I did not even know what would happen to me from one minute to the next. I was heavily intoxicated, whether by drugs or by fear, I couldn't tell. I could not resist anything. I could not say anything. I don't remember speaking at all. Who are they? What do they want? In my rare moments of enlightenment, these questions were raised over and over in my mind. I could not find an answer. One of the blurry faces spoke to me in Russian. In my memory, his voice seems to echo from afar. "We are moving," he said. Was I hallucinating? The men in this place all seemed to have the same facial features. They were just blank faces, washed out, pixelated, devoid of any specific characteristics, as if they did not have faces at all. The dark framing of their hair and their thick beards made their heads seem disproportionately large. They were bubblehead men, men with gigantic heads and faces that all looked identical. I was out of the bedroom now, and present in that strange place as an invisible observer. It seemed like I was the victim of some kind of joke or hoax or absurd game. Suddenly, the darkness enveloped me again, but this new darkness was different. It was not the kind of darkness into which you fall instantly and disappear into a deep abyss. It was not the kind of darkness which draws you away so suddenly that it does not give you a chance to get scared for even a split second. It was not the same kind of darkness that I had already experienced. This time, it was such a darkness that regardless the effect of the drugs, you still feel the excruciating fear deep inside your brain. It was a darkness where you realize that the worst is just moments or even seconds away. It was the kind of darkness the condemned man experiences when he is brought to the scaffold to be executed. It was that kind of darkness. They had covered my head with a black hood or sack. One of the men carried me. I felt myself become like some boneless deep-sea creature, a jellyfish, but a jellyfish made of bread dough, malleable and light. My breathing slowed down. My heart was barely beating. My muscles became limp and formless, and my body was slung over someone's shoulder like a bag of rice. I knew it was the end. Then there was a car, the road, and I was sprawled on the back seat with my face uncovered. And we were driving, once again, driving through the night. I woke up after a dream with the feeling that I had slept for ages. Just before I opened my eyes, a thought flashed in my brain, like lightning. For a fraction of a second, it seemed like I had the answer. None of this was real. None of it had happened. There were no kidnappers. There was no rickety car. I had fallen asleep, and it was all some kind of strange nightmare. In another second, I would open my eyes and find myself right where I belonged, snug in my bed in the cozy apartment I shared with my mom. I was wrong. My eyes popped open and confirmed the horrible truth. Everything that I hoped was a nightmare was, in fact, reality. Surprisingly and sadly, my mind was crystal clear and in no way clouded. I found myself in an unfamiliar room, immersed in twilight. On one dark wall I could make out a slightly lighter square where there was a window, tightly draped with something dark. But even through the gloom I could clearly discern its shape because of a small amount of daylight penetrating along the edges of the window. In here, it was night. Outside, it was daytime. To my right there was a wall with a carpet hung on it. This is a typically Eastern tradition. People hang thick, beautiful, colorful Turkish wool rugs on their walls. But this rug wasn't thick, and it wasn't beautiful. It was a cruel mockery of the tradition. The rug was thin, shabby, threadbare, hanging on nails hammered into the wall, a piece of woven fabric. It was like the flag of a ruined nation. A carpet maker would weep to see it, and my face was so close to the wall that I could see the rug's braids. The room was like a loud scream in my face. Everything in it told me that the frightening episodes I remembered were not a dream. The memories treacherously started to arise, one after another, like shards of glass from a broken mirror, sharp, painful pieces of the things that had happened to me. I could see it all. The moments marched through my head one by one like fascist shock troops. A lump formed in my throat, and each memory caused that lump to swell. Soon the lump was so fat, so thick, it would not let me to breathe. This was not a dream. This was not a nightmare. It had all really happened, and it was still going on. For the first time, I was of sound mind, and I finally realized the depth of my predicament. I lay motionless, paralyzed with despair. Tears flowed from my eyes across the cheeks and slipping like cool jets all the way down my neck. Fear and helplessness tied me down. I felt choked, like big, strong hands were on my throat. My heart was torn apart. I lay on the bed, and I could not move. Most of all, in that moment, I wanted to go back to sleep and never wake up. I did not know how much time has passed since I was stripped of my former life, and now it seemed that it was a long time ago. What's next? What could possibly be next? I lay there and sobbed silently. I did not know why I was there, and I did not know what would happen to me. In my mind, I howled in agony like a wounded animal. I shrieked in despair, but in the real world, I did not utter a sound. I wanted to be quiet so as not to bring attention to myself. It was terrible to be here, but I suspected that by making noise, I could bring something even worse. After some time, I got up slowly and sat on the bed. In the dim light, I could see the poor interior of the premises. In the 1950s and 1960s, Nikita Khrushchev had sought to reform and improve housing across the Soviet Union. This room was the result. A small drab square, a utilitarian box. It won 0 points for style. It was a standard room, one of millions like it, in millions of standard compact apartments, in hundreds of thousands of 5-story buildings, spread across the largest country on earth. It was a triumph of function over form. It was ruthlessly efficient. Draw one box, then build it again, and again, and again. I was on a wooden bed, and the bed was pushed up against the same wall that was curtained with that incomprehensible colored scrap of rug, that embarrassment to carpet makers and carpet traders everywhere. Under the only light spot, the window, there was a bedside table with an old cassette player, and that was the room: bed, window, table. I sat up in bed. I was barefoot, and my feet made contact with the cold floor. On the ground, a few feet away, I spotted a carelessly dropped pair of thin flat shoes, pink, with white trim. I've seen those before. They were like an uncovered clue. A piece of my dream, a small detail which I had forgotten, had just been recalled. It made the nightmare even more real. I knew the slippers. I had already worn them in the previous place. I slipped my feet into the cool insides of the shoes and got out of bed. My mouth was dry, my head was spinning, and I felt myself light and empty inside. When was the last time I ate? I've always been skinny, and I would constantly watch my diet and starve myself from time to time to stay fit. I still had my black dress on, rolled up high to the hips, almost to my waistline, showing the black lace panties I wore underneath. I stood up, and dress easily dropped down my hips. Our relationship had changed. It seemed to me that it was no longer fitted to my body as it had been before. Once it had hugged my curves, and now it was just hanging down, a black tube to cover myself with. I lost weight quickly, and I obviously had not eaten for at least a couple of days. The little black dress had always been my favorite. It was like a sleeveless turtleneck, and it came to the mid-thigh. It fit me perfectly, in all the right places. When I wore it with my black leather high-heeled shoes, it looked impressive, let's say. Impressive is a word, and so is sexy. And that's how it looked. In my previous life, anyway. Now, on top of my dress, I wore a huge floor-length robe. I had no idea where it came from. It was one of those heavy velour robes that flooded the street markets and were sold by Vietnamese street vendors. It seemed that the robe was bright pink ones, made of thick plush fabric. and embroidered with various colors. Now it was old, and even in the dim light I could see that it was faded and frayed. Some unknown person had taken pity on me and draped me in the robe at some point. When had that happened? While I was sleeping in the bed, in the car, in the other apartment? I didn't know. Why am I here? I could not understand it. Most of my life I had been a nice person. I had never done anything wrong. I did not deserve to be punished like this. I tried to think of the worst thing I had done, something that might bring this terrible fate upon me. One day in the 6th grade, my girlfriend and I stole 2 bananas from the grocery store. It was the only store in the neighborhood that sold vegetables and fruits, and it was a place where once a year they sold bananas. Bananas. They were the dream of every Soviet child, ripe, with little brown spots on their bright yellow skin, and a tropical fragrance so foreign and sensual and so totally intoxicating. People would wait for them to arrive at the store for a full year and then stand in a long line to buy just a few of them. I enjoyed that unusual exotic flavor, savoring every bite. In Soviet times, bananas were not just some regular imported fruit. They were messages sent from another world, a place which the Soviet people were forbidden to enter. People would stand all afternoon in a long line, not necessarily because they liked the taste of bananas. They would patiently wait just to get a small taste of the outside world. That evening, my friend and I went to the vegetable shop to buy, as we often did, 2 glasses of delicious birch juice. We had a couple coins in our pockets that were given to us by parents, and there we were, standing in the tiny store, 2 6th graders, in front of the huge glass showcase where the sellers displayed the grim, wilted, and uninviting fruits and vegetables that were usually on offer. But this day, things were different. On top of the showcase, there were a few trays loaded with bright yellow bananas. It seemed like they must have been delivered to the store just a few moments before. No one was around. There was no line of people. In fact, there was not a single creature in the whole store, only us, 2 small children staring up at that big bunch of long-awaited fruit and inhaling that smell, a smell that would drive a child mad. We had a few coins in our pockets, but the money was not enough to buy the bananas. The money was not enough to buy even half of a single banana. But the bananas were right there. Their beauty beckoned to us, and that smell. It was the scent of mystery and adventure, of overseas and unknown countries. We could just about reach up and touch them with our hands. I think, by nature, the man is a very rotten creature. We are thieves and liars and murderers. We are con artists. We are dishonest with everyone and most of all with ourselves. If there were not the harsh limits of the law and the threat of subsequent punishment, the world would quickly turn into a bloody mess, literally overnight, with people killing and hurting each other everywhere you look. We were never taught to steal, and we knew that you are not supposed to take what is not your own. I don't remember saying a word to my friend or she to me. There was a tray of individual bananas which had been torn from the bunches in the process of transportation. Our hands reached out with lightning speed. We grabbed 1 banana each and instantly disappeared from the store. We ran away as fast as we could, holding our sweet trophies. We ran until we couldn't breathe. We hid inside a construction site, and after our wind came back, we ate the bananas. Mine was the sweetest and the most delicious banana I had ever tasted. I knew what it could cost me. A trip to the child's room at the police station, a stark light shining in my face, and half a dozen stern-faced KGB men surrounding me. Now the banana faded from memory. The dark walls of the room, the gray and cold floor, the wooden bed, that improbable piece of old rock on the wall, the bedside table with a tape recorder on it, this was the dismal theater set of my surroundings. If I were in an existential play, one which took place entirely in a grim and unhappy room, they couldn't have designed it any better. The door to the connected room was closed, and I did not want to open this Pandora box. The door filled me with dread. It loomed there, threatening to open at any moment. I decided not to go out of the room voluntarily. I wanted to prolong my safe existence in this room. I had been gone from home for some time, a day, 2 days, 2 weeks. It could have been any of this. And I realized now that the search for me had already begun. My mom would be pulling all the strings she had. I just needed to sit tight and not to show my captors that I woke up, and just wait. I didn't know where I was and exactly what had happened. I tried to restore the chain of events. A night out at the restaurant, then a fight with my boyfriend. Right now, from this room, the fight seemed so pointless, so dumb. After that, the rest was a blur. A car driving through the long night, the evil face of the Italian, foreign people talking in a strange language, and then another car. Now, this place. It seemed like an eternity had passed since I last saw my loved ones. I looked at the door again. It was an ordinary door painted gray. I absolutely did not know what to do. Should I knock on the closed door and beg for mercy, cry and have a fit of hysterics? Or should I just sit quietly and wait? Wait for what? Waiting is always the worst, but it still seemed better than the alternative. This strange prison cell of a room was bad enough. I was afraid to find something even more horrible behind that door. I was exhausted from all the stress, overwhelmed with endless fear. I could not adequately think. I just sat quietly on the bed and looked around the room. The color of the window bothered me. It was too dark. It was more than strange. I did not want to approach the window and take a closer look at it. I did not want to move for fear of making a noise. The floorboards could squeak under my feet. Time passed, and the room did not get any brighter. A bare light bulb hung from the ceiling. Probably I could turn the light on, but I was not going to do it. I was not going to do anything to bring the attention of whoever or whatever was behind the door. It was a small-sized room like those in many Soviet apartments, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet. It was spare and barren. It did not seem like anyone lived there permanently. The wall was covered in nondescript wallpaper, grayish, damaged, scratched, and spotted in places. The cheap bed was pushed up against the wall. It was narrow, with a thin wooden headboard and footrest. In the dim light, everything looked gray. The sheets, the pillows, the quilt, everything. I watched the door. Even in the gloom I could see the contrast of the dark circle of the built-in lock below the handle. That door separated me from the rest of the world that was now turned into something wrong and pointless, ridiculous and absurd, totally unnatural, like the sudden death of a newborn child. I did not want the door to open. I was thirsty and my bladder had awakened. I could not hold it much longer. The state of distress blunted the physiological needs of the body and kept them shut off for a while. But that had its limits too. I was nauseated from hunger, I was thirsty, and I needed to use the bathroom, all at the same time. I knew what I had to do. I had to stand up, step toward the door, and open it. But I could not do it. I was too scared. The very idea of opening that door flooded my system with adrenaline. My heart started thumping in my chest, and the throbbing in my head seemed like it would crack my skull into pieces. I did not know what I would say when the door opened, and what if it didn't open? Would I knock on it? I could not bear it much longer. I needed to go to the bathroom. What if the door never opened and I had to go right here in the room? No, please, I could not bear the shame. My bladder was now on the verge of explosion. I had to do something. Why was this making me get out of the room and head into the unknown? Why should I leave my safe room just because of my bladder? I had sat on the edge of the bed the whole time after I woke up, trying to be motionless. Now, I hesitantly stood up and wrapped the weird pink robe around my body, like it could defend me from something. With a pounding heart, I moved towards the door. My heartbeat was so loud that it seemed to fill the whole empty room. If a person existed on the other side of the door, he could probably hear my heart too. The room behind the door was silent. For a brief moment, I had a new fear. There would be no one there. The door would be locked, and I would be stuck in this room, and I would die of a bladder rupture in a pool of my own urine. I pushed the handle down, and indeed the door was locked. But immediately I heard someone behind the door moving towards it. My heart sank into my toes. I felt like I might vomit if only there were food in my stomach. A key turned in the lock. Each turn of it echoed like a hammer banging on the anvil of my brain. The door opened. The first thing I saw was an automatic rifle that hung across a man's chest, with the barrel pointing to the side and the gun's strap around the man's thick tree-trunk neck. After a moment of shock, I saw the man himself. I could not guess at his age. He was tall, with deep-set eyes on either side of a huge thick beak of a nose. He had dark hair, bushy and unkempt, and his beard was rather short, disheveled, and stuck out in different directions, as it was made of wire and glued onto this massive chin. His head seemed disproportionately large. His arm rested on the barrel of his rifle, which was strapped on so high it was almost to his chin. The gun seemed so natural on him it was almost as if he was born with it attached. I only had one single desire, to get to the bathroom. I could not think about anything else. I was not even afraid of this man. I did not care. He held the door open with one hand. He looked at me without emotion. He was totally calm. "I need to go to the bathroom," I said. The man said nothing. I knew he understood me because he jerked his head to the side, indicating the way to the toilet. He took a step back and let me come out, then immediately positioned himself in front of me, so I followed him to the bathroom. It took no more than 5 or 6 steps. First we passed through a bigger room, then down a narrow corridor. In the hallway there were 2 white-painted doors with dark, dirty spots and scratches on them. The door to the left was the kitchen. The door to the right was down a tiny hallway. It was the exit, the way out of here. Although both doors were closed, I knew what lay behind them. In fact, I knew the layout of such apartment by heart. It was the typical for the ones built during the Khrushchev and Brezhnev eras of the Soviet Union. And I had been in places like this many times. When I was a teenager, we lived in a small military town, and our apartment was exactly the same. The man brought me to the bathroom and then stood right behind me. I opened the door and rushed into the long-awaited paradise. The tiny room closed me in, affording me a small sense of privacy. The toilet room was not the cleanest place in the world. It was tiny, maybe 3 or 4 feet across. The walls were painted dark green. There was nothing in it except the toilet, not even any toilet paper. The toilet itself was gross, disgusting, like a public toilet at a bus station. There was a dark circle of rust inside the bowl and yellow spots of urine along the edges. This was a place for men, widely understood to behave like barnyard animals in the absence of women. Fortunately for me, The toilet still had the seat attached, a small miracle in itself. The seat was still where it belonged, and it was raised. It was probably the same seat that had come with the apartment when it was new. The standard Soviet toilet seat made of yellowish, brownish cork, a very practical color because the dark hue makes it hard to tell how filthy the seat really is. I lowered the seat very fast, trying to minimize the amount of time my fingers spent touching it. I immediately sat on top of it and experienced the absolute bliss, the sweet blessed relief caused by the release of my bladder. I suddenly realized that I had not showered in what felt like ages. I felt so dirty. The toilet room was separated from the bathroom proper, as in many of the old Soviet-era apartments. I wanted to wash my hands very badly. I wanted to wash my entire body. I pulled up my panties, flushed, and came out. My guard was leaning back against the wall like a statue. His epic bulk blocked the tiny hallway that led to the exit. "Can I wash my hands?" He nodded again, indicating the next door. The bathroom was also painted dark green. It contained an old bathtub. Someone had messily sealed the edges of it with concrete. A sink with bare pipes, and 3 strange vessels under it on the floor, probably to catch the water leaking from the bottom. A small rectangular piece of mirror on the wall completed the interior. I opened the cold water tap and began to greedily drink from the stream, filling my body with life-giving moisture. I drank like someone who had just crawled across a blazing desert, a mad woman, desperate, dehydrated, and parched like the sun-baked ground. After I took in all I could, I brushed my teeth using my finger. When I looked up, I saw a haggard face in the little piece of mirror. For a moment, I did not know the face as myself. It seemed like the face of an old person or a witch. There were dark circles under the eyes. It might be smeared mascara from my long-ago night out in the restaurant, or it might be traces of dirt and dust mingled with exhaustion. My once shiny blonde hair had turned into a ratty bird's nest. My green eyes seemed to be the only bright spot on a gray and spotted face. Those eyes were alert and aware. I wanted very badly to take a shower, but it felt so weird to be here. I quickly but thoroughly washed my face, then soaked my hair and combed it back with my hands. I washed my underwear and used it as a wet towel for my whole body. I enjoyed every second of this rapid but luxurious 5-minute act. Every day at home I would use gallons of hot water twice a day, taking long showers, and I never really appreciated it. But this little cold panty sponge bath brought me joy in a dark place. Amazing what a little bit of water will do. I put my underwear back on soaking wet. Even so, I felt much better. I felt clean. There was a towel hanging on a twisted heating pipe on the wall. It was a dirty, ratty towel, and I didn't want to touch it. When I opened the door, my guard was standing in the same position as before, against the wall. He saw me. He nodded his head again, directing me back to the dark room where I had awakened. That was it then. I had to go back to the room. I was to be a prisoner inside there. What if I just tried to run away? I knew the way out. Would he shoot me? I had no idea where I was or what was going on. Maybe I would be released soon. Anyway, the front door was locked. I knew that much without even touching it. And the man with the gun seemed belligerent towards me. If I tried to run and got stuck at a locked door, he seemed like the type to tie me up and chain me to the radiator. I had seen exactly that type of thing happen in the movies. I did not want to risk it happening to me. Better, now that I was awake, to take my time and think about what to do next. We headed back toward the small and dark room. We crossed through the bigger room again. It was much brighter than the one I was in. There was a red patterned rug on the wall and a red sofa against it. Also, there was an old small chest with a trifold mirror attached to it. It took me just a few seconds to take in all the details of the room. The light and unpleasant color of the room's wallpaper gave me the impression that this flat was an example of the apartments that were brand new and released to the public in the 1970s or 1980s. Those were not the glory days of Soviet construction. I remembered from my childhood that as soon as many Soviet families, including ours, got a brand new and free apartment, they began to make major repairs and improvements to it. Certainly, Soviet people appreciated any properties that they got from the government for free, and it was their choice to make a repair or do an improvement. Some people preferred not to bother, like the people who owned this apartment, for example. Heavy dark drapes hung across the windows, tightened at the edges. Despite this, daylight penetrated into the room. Outside, the world was going on as usual. The sun was shining. Somewhere people were laughing and children were playing. Back inside my dark, tiny room, feeling better from having bathed and used the bathroom, I experienced a growing confidence that I would soon be released. I refused to accept what was happening. It was definitely a misunderstanding, a terrible mistake. The strange country, the guard with the big gun, the abduction. It was not the story of my life. I was a free person, an ordinary student. I had never hurt anyone. I just lived my life, enjoying it. What happened? Why am I here? I was confused, certainly. But now that I had come to my senses, I was also positive that this situation would not last long, that everything would be clarified and I would be going home soon. I was still bothered by the window. No sunlight passed through it. It made everything in the room seem dark and hostile. Finally, I decided I would take a look and see what was wrong with it. I walked right up to it and experienced a real shock. The window was like something from a scene in a horror movie. The glass was painted black. The paint was solid, caked on in several layers. And it was not painted on the inside. Only the outside was painted, or maybe between the paints. A person on the inside locked in this room could not scratch the paint off. A cold shiver ran down my spine. What kind of torture room is this? Who paints the windows with black paint? Along the edges of the glass, the paint was less thick, and therefore let some sunlight to go through. I began to study it in more detail, trying to see what was outside. The window was surrounded by an old wooden frame and had been painted white long before, and now the paint was peeling off almost everywhere. I could see dark spots of wood underneath. I attempted to look through the thinner layer of paint and through the tiny gaps between the painted brushstrokes. It was impossible. I could only recognize that the day was sunny, but I could not see anything outside the window. The slits were too small. I needed to examine the window more closely. To do so, I would have to stand on the thick and white windowsill. But I did not want to make any noise. I did not want the man to come in and restrain me. I did not even want to attract his attention. Everything in this room was foreign to me. I did not want to grow accustomed to it, or somehow be attached to it or associated with it. I did not want to settle down in it. I did not want to become comfortable here. Instead, I just sat on the edge of the bed and waited. I had to be ready for the time when I would be rescued. Soon, this would all be over and I would be heading back home. My mom would cook something delicious as usual. I would forgive Sergei for the argument and life would be back on track. I would never forget this misunderstanding, of course, but I would remember these few days as a nightmare, something horrible but temporary, and which passed quickly like a childhood fever. I had to remain strong. I would not cry, I would not beg for mercy, I would just wait a day or maybe two. My mom and Sergei would find a way to pull me out of here. I just had to wait. Be patient, be strong, and stay ready to escape. Soon the apartment filled with men's voices, deep voices, laughing voices, menacing voices, all just on the other side of that locked door. It changed everything for me. I cringed with helpless fear, and my heart pounded in my chest, adrenaline pumping through my body once again. Cautiously, I crept to the door and listened. I could not understand a single word they were saying. The voices brought back the painful memories of the darkness, the car, the monstrous people. I was again in agonizing emotional pain. The foreign language of the men sounded like gibberish amid babel, and I guessed that they were talking about me, saying the most terrifying things. I was not so much afraid that they come in and kill me instantly. That would not be the worst possibility. I was much more afraid to be tortured or abused. I was in panic. My heart was racing. I could not breathe. I nearly gasped for air. This could not be real. It was not happening. I would not believe in it. I found myself back on the bed. I wrapped the rope around my body, hugged my knees, and sat there trying to think. What should I do? I did not know. Should I break the window to get out and run? I could not. I did not know what was going on behind it. I didn't even know what floor it was. What if I broke the window and I was on the 5th floor? Even if it was the 1st floor, I did not know where I was or where I would run to. The unknown was everywhere around me, and I was alone, all alone. Time passed. Behind the gray door and the black window, life seemed to go on. I was completely cut off and isolated from the whole world. Why? On the other side of the door there were voices, and there was movement. The men were walking around, laughing out loud and talking. A sudden sharp turn of the key in the lock made me cower in fear. I held my breath as the door opened. My room became lighter for just a few seconds. In the doorway, a man appeared and put something on the floor. He left quickly, locking the door again behind him. I didn't have time to ask him anything, but probably I would not have spoken anyway. I was in a complete stupor. Curiosity and wonderful smell made me creep to the door to see what was on the floor. He left a plate with a large piece of pita bread. I recognized it right away. It was delicious homemade Eastern bread, which is baked in special ovens. At home, pita bread like that was sold in our local markets. Astrakhan is one of the most diverse cities in southern Russia. There are hundreds of different ethnic groups that inhabit it, with cultural influences ranging from Persian to Chinese. Next to the bread there was a glass milk bottle, filled with water or some other clear liquid. The bread had such a delightful smell, and my stomach cramped with hunger at the scent of it. I loved bread like that, even though I ate it very rarely. As a child, before I was burdened by dieting to look good, I ate the bread by the ton, especially when it was hot, just out of the oven. I remember, as a kid, my mother sent me to the store to buy a loaf of bread after school, almost every day. Sometimes I went together with my friends from the block. We had to walk for 20 minutes to get to the store. The shop always had freshly baked bread in the evening. Each of us would buy one loaf of the still hot bread, and by the time we returned home, each of us would only have a quarter of it left. We would eat the hot and crisp delicious bread the whole walk back. How great it was then, in carefree childhood. Now, locked in the room, I was hungry, but was afraid to touch the food or drink the water. The water reminded me of how I had lost consciousness and my dreary existence in a near vegetable state. I suspected that the water or the bread might again be drugged or poisoned. I had to stay conscious and alert for when someone came to rescue me. The day dragged on slowly. The room grew darker, night pulling in the corners. On the other side of the door, the voices fell silent for a moment, then resumed again. Someone was talking loudly, very close to the door. My heart ached with fear at the sound of it. But nothing happened. I was forgotten in the damn room. I was thirsty, but I would not touch water they had brought me, and I wanted to use the bathroom again. My traitorous body had to shut down and hibernate. I did not want it to continue to demand the fulfillment of its physical needs. It was not fair. I wanted to stay in the room until someone came to rescue me. I didn't want to ask permission to go to the bathroom again. I'm not a prisoner. I felt humiliated, but my body would not cooperate with me. It wanted to drink, it wanted to eat, it had to go to the bathroom. I needed to go again. I could hear the man behind the door, and I was terrified to leave the room. My mind invented horrible possibilities. I would be tortured to death. I would be dismembered, my organs cut from my body. My heart nearly burst out of my chest, fear filling me inside. I was like a hunted animal, caught in a trap. Every sound, a creaking floorboard, a burst of laughter, something being dropped, made my body twitch and vibrate in terror. I was paralyzed by fear of the unknown. I did not understand why I was there, why I was deprived of my own home, why I was deprived of my freedom. The helplessness and uncertainty burned me from the inside. I knocked, and a moment later the door was opened. I was prepared to see the same tall man that was there in the morning, but a completely different person answered. A small man with an average build, a repulsively ugly man. He had closely cropped dark blonde hair and a beard. More precisely, his beard was just a thin hairline growing along the edge of his face. His eyes sparkled with cruelty. He looked like a serial killer, a very short one. Under his arm there was a holster hanging with a gun tucked inside. "I need to go to the bathroom." He grinned at me, and after letting the moment drag on several seconds, barely jerked his head toward the bathroom. His cruel eyes were like gun sights, and I felt them targeted on me. I tried not to look up, but I noticed a sleeping man on the red sofa. A machine gun lay by his side on the floor. The light was on. The curtains were tightly drawn. Without raising my eyes, I slipped towards the bathroom. There were people in the kitchen, a few of them were talking, and the door was ajar. Shorty followed very close behind me. For a second, I even thought he would follow me into the bathroom. The toilet paper was still missing. I went out and asked to wash my hands. He grinned at me. There was something evil about his smile, and nodded towards the door. I went inside of the tiny bathroom. There was still no hot water, only cold. I washed my hands with a dirty, disgusting piece of soap remnant that I found on the sink. Then I drank water right from the faucet. It tasted like rust. Again, I noticed the strange vessel with a narrow and long spout at the side, like those that I have seen on display in the Museum of East. It was almost like a teapot. At that moment, from the depths of my memory, a piece of information emerged, a little fact that I had once read somewhere. Muslims do not use toilet paper when they go to the bathroom. They wash themselves with water. That's what the pitcher was for. It also explained why the toilet paper was missing. I stared at the vessel. I would never ask this man about it. I would never say a word. It would be easier on my dignity to sneak a bottle of drinking water into the bathroom under my robe. Something about the walk to the bathroom and back to the room under the supervision of the armed man was hard on me. It was too humiliating to handle. I did not want to be a prisoner. I did not want everyone to know about my body habits. I wanted my freedom. I did not know how it happened, but right before Shorty shut the door and locked it behind me again, I broke my silence. In fact, I almost screamed at him. "Why am I here? You can answer me? Then, can I speak to your boss?" It was the wrong question to ask. I tried to say it politely, but instantly I realized my mistake. I should never have said a word. I did not believe he was the man in charge, and I had demonstrated this to him. He froze, and then incinerated me with his eyes. The words flew from his mouth like the bullets. "Shut your mouth and sit quietly if you don't want me to shoot your head off." He said it in perfect Russian, with a slight accent. He was so angry that suddenly I was shaking like a leaf in the wind. I did exactly as he ordered. I went inside and sat on the bed. The door closed and the key turned in the lock. Dizzy from hunger, I looked down at the piece of delicious bread. I did not know what to do. I needed food. I needed to stay strong. I ate it. The bread was soft and delicious. I enjoyed every single crumb. It seemed like I had not eaten for ages. The day faded, and the room sank into total darkness. I closed my eyes as I lay down in this strange bed, wrapped in a quilt blanket, thinking about tomorrow. What would it bring for me? Would I still be alive at the end of the day? Sleep took me by surprise. I slept the whole night dreamless. I opened my eyes, and the same dark confines of the room appeared. I was still in prison. The nightmare would never end. My throat was tight. It felt like I would choke from the terror and the sadness. Tears streamed down my face. I could not stand it anymore. To die would be better than to face another day in this room. I was lonely. I was miserable. Why was I there? They hadn't explained anything. What were they waiting for? What was happening? I waited, putting off the moment when I had to knock again and go to the bathroom under supervision. I did not have a toothbrush. I had no comb, no other clothing or underwear. My little black dress was a mockery now. From the corner of my eye, I caught a movement in the dark window. I glanced that way, but it was my own reflection that I saw. I looked like a ghost in a long black cloak. October 11th, 1994, Astrakhan, Russia. It was not like sleep at all. Every night the woman fell into a trance, a spell, a stupor, where she went numb, then drifted off, carried away by her terror. Somewhere between asleep and awake, in a fitful doze, a dream came to her, a blurry picture, in which it was impossible to see anything but the face of her daughter. The woman spotted her in the gray distance, framed by blonde hair blown by the wind. The girl's face was obscured by the blowing hair. The woman could not make out her daughter's eyes. She woke with a start, her breath caught in her throat. The phone was ringing. It was still very early in the morning. Outside the window there was not yet light in the sky. For the past week she had lived as if in a coma. She did not remember how she went to work and how she came back from there. She no longer lived in her former reality. Instead, she lived in a nightmare world, a place where her only task was to hope for a call from the police. Just yesterday, the police has accepted the case. They would investigate the disappearance of her daughter. Nobody knew where she was. The woman called every single friend of her daughter. Last, she was seen at the restaurant across the alley with her boyfriend. He didn't know where she was. Since then, the woman was always near the telephone. Yesterday at work, she had not left her desk for a moment. At home, she picked up the phone every 5 minutes and checked to see if it was still working. Her sole reason for being, the very center of her existence, was to wait for the detective to contact her. Now the sharp and alarming shriek of the telephone cut the dead silence of her apartment. She moved quickly through the shadows and went to it. With trembling hands, she picked up the receiver. "Hello?" A man's voice. "Your daughter is with us in Chechnya. So far, she is alive and well. We will exchange her for 300 million rubles. Get the money. I'm giving you 2 weeks. When I call back in 2 weeks, the money must be ready." The woman nearly screamed it. "I don't have that much money. I will sell everything I have and give it to you. Bring back my daughter, please." The phone was already dead. There was no sound except the jarring beep of a line that had been cut off. They had hung up before she even finished her sentence. She froze. She could not breathe. She could not think. Her head felt like a helium balloon on the end of a string. It would float up to the ceiling, then out the window and far away over the city. She could not feel her legs. Everything around her seemed to warp and change shape. The inside of her home had become vague and formless. It had lost any sense of solidness or dimension. She leaned back against the wall and slid slowly to the floor. The end of the chapter. To be continued. Thank you for listening. Please don't forget to write a comment, like this video, and subscribe to my channel. Best wishes. See you next time.